Now, there is a pretty intriguing article that I've stumbled upon. It says that The Witcher 3 and Cyberpunk 2077 devs put a considerable amount of effort into side stories. And while I think this article is interesting, there is a bit deeper thing here, and is basically saying something that longtime CDPR fans already knew rather than revealing a major insight. And in that sense, my biggest takeaway isn't that The Witcher 3 and Cyberpunk 2077 have great side quests. It's actually why they have them. Essentially, Pavel Sasko confirms that CDPR doesn't treat side quests as filler. They treat many side quests almost like mini main quests. And according to him, they often receive the same budget, similar production timelines, experienced developers, and perhaps most importantly, more creative freedom because they don't have to move the central plot forward. And I would argue that philosophy is exactly what separates CDPR from many other RPG studios. And I'll give you a classic example. A lot of open-world games still fall into the trap of designing side content around objectives rather than stories. You'll often see things like kill 10 enemies, collect 15 herbs, escort this NPC, clear another bandit camp, or fetch an item from a cave. The gameplay may change slightly, but narratively speaking, they are forgettable. And more often than not, you start skipping dialogue because you've learned these quests don't really matter. And that's exactly what I do when I encounter these types of quests. Now think about The Witcher 3 for example. The Bloody Baron questline technically starts as a contract to find Ciri, but instead it evolves into one of the best written stories in RPG history. And it has everything. Domestic abuse, alcoholism, grief, guilt, supernatural horror, and impossible moral choices. And when you think about it, it's technically just one section of the game. Or more examples from The Witcher 3. Take Cardinal Sins, Tower Full of Mice, A Frying Pan, Spick and Span, or dozens of Witcher contracts. Many begin as simple errands, but almost none of them end that way. And obviously the same applies to Cyberpunk 2077. We have Judy's storyline, Panam's missions, Riverward's investigations, or my favorite, Perales' conspiracy. And these aren't just optional content. I mean, they are, but some people consider them the best stories in the entire game. And in fact, I would argue that if you removed all the side quests from Cyberpunk, the main campaign would actually feel surprisingly short and less emotionally impactful. And by the way, that was one of many problems I had with Cyberpunk because I felt it was short. And that is surprisingly something that was done intentionally by CDPR because apparently The Witcher 3 metrics show that a tremendous number of people never actually finish Geralt's long adventure. I just wonder who these people are because I would really much like to slap the living shit out of them. But anyway, I digress. What I wanted to say is that I think Sasko accidentally highlights something that many writers have talked about for years. Main stories are restrictive because they have to establish the setting, introduce characters, maybe build tension, support multiple endings, account for player progression, and fit marketing expectations. But when you think about it, side quests don't. They're just free to experiment. And that's why CDPR could make something as bizarre as the Paralysis conspiracy, or as unsettling as Cinderman, without worrying about whether every player experiences it. I mean, some of Cyberpunk's weirdest and most memorable stories exist precisely because they weren't part of the critical path. However, not everything is rainbows and sunshine, because this approach is also incredibly expensive. And this is the part the article doesn't really discuss. But fret not, I will. You see, making optional content this good costs a fortune. I mean, think about it. Every major side quest gets the following: cinematic cutscenes, professional voice acting, motion capture, unique environments, branching dialogues perhaps, and obviously a custom scripting. Which then means you're effectively making dozens of small games into one giant RPG. And I would argue that helps explain why CDPR games take 5 to 7 years to develop. Not to mention, like I already pointed out, it explains why they're so expensive. You simply cannot take any shortcuts to produce this level of handcrafted content. But at the same time, that's why the games are so memorable and legendary. Now let's shift our attention to Witcher 4 and Cyberpunk 2. If you think about it, this particular philosophy is exactly why expectations for these two games are enormous. because as far as I'm concerned, I won't be judging these two games based on the graphics, open world, or even, dare I say, combat. I'll probably judge whether random NPCs have stories worth hearing. For example, in The Witcher 4, I'll probably take a good look at contracts to see whether or not they are unforgettable like in the third game. Maybe there's going to be certain optional quests that could make me laugh, cry, or question my decisions after I finish the quest, because let me tell you, that happens a lot in these games. And that's basically why the bar is so ridiculously high. And ironically, CDPR created the pressure themselves with The Witcher 3. What I would like to point out at the end of all this rambling of mine is that I think the article gets a little carried away when it says future CDPR games will probably end up proving some of the greatest RPGs. I mean, this sounds more like optimism rather than analysis as far as I'm concerned. Because remember, history shows that reputation isn't guaranteed. If you remember, for example, Cyberpunk 2077 launched in a terrible technical state despite excellent writing. Also, bigger budgets don't automatically produce better games. And finally, development complexity keeps increasing every generation. So the quality of side quests is only one ingredient. But there are many more like performance, pacing, combat, progression systems, AI, and technical polish, and they matter just as much. So my biggest takeaway isn't that CDPR makes great side quests. I think we've known that for several years. It's that the studio consciously invests AAA level resources into optional content rather than treating it as padding. And that's a rare design philosophy, and it's a major reason why players still talk about quests like Bloody Baron, Sinnerman, or Perales Conspiracy years after finishing the games. If CDPR can combine the storytelling philosophy with a technical polished launch, both The Witcher 4 and Cyberpunk 2 have the potential to be among the defining RPGs of the next generation. But after the lesson of Cyberpunk 2077, I think it's wise to stay cautiously optimistic rather than assuming lightning will strike twice. And that's basically my take on this news. Thanks very much for watching, and as always, like, share, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. And that's it from me, until the next one.